Hello, this is the first part of my 8-foot tall Thanos costume build. I'll be making this out of 10mm thick EVA foam because foam is cheap, easy to get hold of, easy to work with and safe to do in my living room. Much to the displeasing of my wife, but whatever. So if you like the idea of that, make sure you click subscribe, hit the little notification bell, and while you're down there, may as well give a thumbs up to this video, ain't you? I'll be using a Pepakura file of the Thanos armour that I found online, and a link to that can be found in the description of this video. Now each episode in this series will be based on a different body part, starting off in this episode with the forearms. I've chosen the forearms first because they're quite small, so it should be pretty easy to put together. Now the Pepakura file isn't going to be bang on perfect, print out, put together. Usually there's some slight modifications that need to be done, so I'll be focusing a lot in each episode on how to modify the pieces to end up with a more cleaner, better finished piece. So let's start off in Pepakura Designer.
So here's the forearm, and the pieces on the right here, in case you're unfamiliar with this software. All the parts laid out flat from the model on the left. So you click on one of the ones on the right and it highlights it on the model so you can tell which piece goes where, which makes it really easy to assemble it later. One of the first things we need to do is to rescale this. We need to make it so it's 8 foot. So we're going to scale this to what I'm typing in here. And that will make the forearm fit an 8-foot tall Thanos. Now that's scaled up, we need to lay out these pieces ready to print. Before we do that, I'm going to change my printer settings to have a bigger margin because I find it sometimes cuts off the ends, which is no good. And you need to also make sure that those two boxes at the bottom there are checked. That way it will print alignment guides on each page, which makes lining up the pieces when they spread across more than one page a lot easier. Now these aren't going to be set out to print very well, as that piece there is spread across tons of pages, so we're going to need to relay all of these. So I'm going to move those over to the side first of all, just so I've got a clear workspace, and then just one at a time using the little green circle at the top there to rotate them, and then just drag them around and position them as best you can. So when laying these out, I find it's best to lay them out so if one piece has to spread across more than one page, to do that so that happens left to right only, so the join is only down the middle vertically, not horizontally. That way page 1 corresponds to page 2 rather than page 1 and the second part of that is like page 10 or something. That way you've got to flick through all of your sheets of paper to find the right page rather than it being in chronological order. Just got to make sure that you can zoom in with the mouse wheel. You've got to make sure that these don't overlap the dotted lines which represent the edge of the page, otherwise you're not going to get the whole thing printed. And that's all the pieces now laid out. So all you need to do is hit print and they're going to print out, and then we'll be ready to start the build. So here are all the pieces for the forearm. I've printed them all out and I'll just tuck them to one side for now. So these are the forearm pieces. First thing we need to do is to lay them all out to make sure they've all printed correctly, and then we need to stick the pieces together using the little marks here in the corner that spread over more than one page. I'm just using electrical tape here. Obviously it means I can't go over the lines because it's solid black. If you had see-through tape it would be a lot easier to do this, and then just using a pair of scissors, or you could use a knife, carefully cut these pieces out following the line. So these pieces here, I've had to cut slits in them following the lines on the templates, and then they need to be joined up. If you don't do this, then where that little gap there's maybe a couple of mil and then the next gap's a couple of mil, if you leave too many of those then your piece is going to be a centimetre or even more too long. So if there's lots of these little darts cut out into each of the pieces, you do need to cut those out. Now as this is curved, as I've added those slits in and stuck it back together, I need to now squish this down as flat as I can to make it easier to trace onto foam, and to keep it flat I'm just going to squish it down and tape it into place. Right, time to trace these onto foam. The foam I'm using is a 10mm thick EVA foam floor mat. I get these in packs of 6. They cost about £10 for a pack of 6, so they're not too expensive. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pin these down using standard straight upholstery pins. And you're going to want to lay these out in such a way that you can maximise your sheet of foam, so don't leave massive gaps. So you're going to have to be pretty careful with where you put these so you can get as many pieces cut out of one mat as possible. So that's with the pieces now pinned down. So now we're going to have to trace around those. So now the pieces are all pinned down. I wouldn't recommend tracing around them with a Sharpie, because no matter how much paint you put on top of these, it always manages to bleed through. So I'm going to use the back of a knife and I'm going to carefully score around these. As you finish going around each piece, I recommend unpinning them and then putting that piece to one side so you know which ones you've done. Just repeat this process for all the pieces. Now it's time to cut them out. Now this blade I've got in my knife, I've had in it for months and months and months, and that's because I always keep it sharp with a knife sharpener. You'll be surprised at how quickly the knife will go dull. When cutting out, make sure you hold the knife straight up, don't give it an angle, otherwise you'll have a beveled edge on each of your pieces, and when it comes to sticking it together you're going to run into all sorts of problems. If you feel your knife dragging through the foam, then it's time to sharpen it. You'll only be able to make a few cuts before you need to get the sharpener back out, so keep it handy. Right, the pieces are now cut out, so I'm laying them down, just a little test fit to see where they're going to go. I've started gluing, and right now, as you can see, I'm having a bit of trouble lining this up. It doesn't line up quite as well. That's a problem with some of these Pepakura files. So what I'm doing is I'm redesigning some pieces. These parts here, for example, that are made up of 3 pieces, there's just going to be a weak spot in the middle, or 2 weak spots in the middle, where they're going to be glued together. It's potentially going to fall apart. Plus, it's going to be harder to bend that into shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take any parts that are 3 pieces like that can do with being one part, just take those templates together so they're one big template, and then I'm going to put them back on the foam and cut them out of foam, so then I've got really big pieces that I'm just going to heat form into shape rather than have to stick lots together. So the shields on the back of the forearms, I think they could be one piece as well. So I'm going to take the 3 I've stuck together to make the middle piece, and then that outer edge, I'm going to stick that on one side, draw around it, and after I've drawn around it on that side, flip it over and do the same on the other side. And then cut round the outside edge of that. And then I'm using a heat gun to heat the back of the foam, not the front of the foam, otherwise you'll burn it. And I'm going to heat this enough so that way when I bend it into shape, it's going to then cool and hold that shape. Just going to bend that by hand. Be careful obviously, because the foam is going to be hot. And then resting that on the edge of the table on my cutting mat, I'm going to cut out the inner edge of that outer trim. I've got it over the edge of the table like this because I've just curved the foam and it won't lay flat anymore. And that middle piece now comes out and is a perfect fit to go into that frame. So I'm using those pins again to just pin that back in, but I'm pinning it in ever so slightly lower. So it's about halfway down the foam, so it gives you an extra depth. And then from the back I'm just using my hot glue gun to glue that in. Now once that's glued in from the back, you're going to need to go around the front as well, otherwise you're going to only have glue on the underside edge. So just squeezing the nozzle of my glue gun into the gap there and squeezing the glue in. Now just heat forming the rest of these pieces, so apply heat and just bend by hand until they get to the desired shape. If you don't quite get there on the first try, you can always add more heat and bend it again, and then it's just a case of gluing and sticking and holding and adding more glue and holding more seams together until you've got a bunch of pieces stuck together and what starts to appear to be a forearm. With the more tricky bits, I hold everything in place with these pins. Just be careful that the pin doesn't protrude through where the glue is going to be, otherwise you'll struggle to get the pin back out. These pieces here are going to get a similar treatment to the Forearm Shield, only it doesn't have a template for it. This design I have realised needs to be on it by looking at reference pictures. So I'm going to take a knife and just draw around a line I've added there about an inch or so in from the edge. And I'm going to take that trim piece and pin it on top of my foam. And again, using the back of a knife to score where I want to cut. And again, leaning that piece over the edge of the table as it's curved to cut that piece out. And just as with the Forearm Shield, I'm going to pin that into place about halfway down and glue it. But first, it needs a special texture. So I'm going to use my very, very sharp knife to score lines about 1/3 of the way into the foam. And I'm going to do these down the entire length of this vertically, using a metal ruler, and then I'm going to flip it around and do exactly the same thing horizontally, and these are probably about 3 mm apart. This is now being pinned into place before gluing on the back. And now using a heat gun to gently heat those score lines I put in it, and as if by magic they all open up and create a really cool texture. Sharpen the knife, take a strip of foam that was to be the centerpiece on the forearm guard, and I'm going to cut this in half so it's only half as thick. You could of course use half as thick foam, but this is all I've got. Once you cut that down all 4 sides to give your knife blade a guide to run through, just hold it flat, and it's almost as if you're like fillet in a fish or something. Not that I've ever done that. And then you want to keep the top piece that's got the really smooth side on it and just get rid of the bit that's got the texture and your dodgy cutting all over it. I'm just going to pin that into place for now while I work on some other details. So the Forearm Shield needs these little detail things cut into it, so I'm going to take the template I use for that and trace around the edge where the detail is going to be on another piece of paper. And then using this edge, I'm going to just freehand where this detail line is going to be. So I've got a new template. And that fits perfectly in on that edge, as that's the piece I drew round. I'm going to pin that into place. And then draw around it with my knife before cutting that out on the curved side only. The part that's glued to the trim around the edge there is going to stay. It's going to stay there. I'm not going to cut that bit. I'm only cutting the curved surface. It's very important. So those 2 bits should flap out like this because they're still stuck on that one edge. And then you're going to push them in and glue them into place. That way that edge will kind of taper off into nothing. Again, gluing that from the back just to hold that into place. When that sets, the pins come out, and then I go around the front again with the glue gun. Using the knife there to score in some additional details only a third of the way into the foam, and then the heat gun will then open them all up. So right now I'm looking at reference pictures of a Hot Toys Thanos figure to know where some more of that texturing is going to be, and I'm just going to freehand that with my knife, scoring again only a third of the way into the foam. And then this bit took a little while, but it looks really cool in the end, scoring those crisscross lines. Just don't mess this up, otherwise you're going to have a lot of ungluing and remaking to do. Using the heat gun again to open up those detail lines. And we're nearly there. I'm just going to hold this on with pins for now. And using two thicknesses of a couple of scrap pieces of foam as spacers for the forearm shield. And again, I'm just pinning this on for now.
And here they are all finished. We've got 2 completed forearms, and as you can see they are pretty ginormous. I mean, if I put my arm in there, you can see it is really big. In fact, I could probably wear this as leg armor and it would be too big. So when Thanos is done, he's going to be absolutely huge, which is cool because he needs to look like he can kick the crap out of all the Avengers. Now, these shields on the front here are only pinned in for now because I'm not sure whether I want to have them detachable and an infinity gauntlet slide on the top, or whether I'm just going to glue them on and have an infinity gauntlet as like a separate piece that you swap out for the left one of these. But I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. So that's these done. It'll be on to the biceps next, so to keep an eye out for that, make sure you subscribe for this YouTube channel and check out the social media links in the description of this video. And remember, you don't have to be great at making to make something great. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.